In this episode, Dale and Val speak to Sanjiv Parekh, who will be presenting at the Project Controls Expo virtual this September. He will be presenting about the stakeholder management megatask for mega projects. For more information, visit projectcontrolsexpo.com to grab a ticket to the expo. And for more in-depth information on the podcast, visit projectchatterpodcast.com. Now, on with the pod.
Hi, Sanjiv. Welcome to the show. Now, tell us, what can we expect from your presentation on stakeholder management, mega tasks for mega projects?
Yeah, thanks, Dale, and thanks, Well, for giving the opportunity for the podcast. Yeah, it's like when I was just thinking about the subject, what I need to present this year, because I was given the opportunity even to open the expo in Australia in 2018. So Project Control Expo is very close to my heart, and this year's subject is stakeholder management mega task for the mega project. So what I want to stress out for the project management and project control people, that the traditional way of managing the triple constraint, the cost, time, and the resources, is no longer working in the new environment. There are many projects which are huge, mega projects. Project is a dynamic thing. And then again, when happen this cost, time, and resource, if we manage only the three constraints on the project, we may not get the outcome what we want. And stakeholder management, as you have seen in many of those news lately, that all those mega project, infrastructure project, oil and gas, mining project, there is always constraint about those stakeholder management. And somehow the stakeholder management is not managed properly, then it will have a huge impact on the cost, time, and the resource. And it's a bigger risk we need to manage.
Such a good point, Sanjeev. And Dale and I, we subscribe to that thought and that way of thinking that the stakeholders and the people in projects are so important. And in fact, they are, in some regards, the critical path. I mean, if you can't get teams and engineers talking to each other, if you can't get project managers and project controls teams working with each other, you have a big risk on your hands of delivering that project on time, on budget, as you mentioned. I'd love to ask another question if I can. So in your presentation, do you get into the details, the psychology behind it, or the behaviors?
Yeah, what I will be doing is I'll be just mainly concentrating on three steps, like identify your stakeholder. So you need to know who are your stakeholder. It can be the person, it can be the organization, or it can be even some community and the group, which can be the stakeholder. And sometimes those stakeholder can be in the favor of the project or maybe against the project. So I'll be mainly concentrating on identify your stakeholder, do the stakeholder analysis and prioritize them. So I'll be just going through the power interest grid, which is the stakeholder analysis work. So you will know more in the detail when I go through the presentation and my talk in the PC Expo. But it's more about identifying your stakeholder and whether some stakeholder may have a power, but they may not have an interest. Some may have a high power and a high interest. So like a high power and high interest, those are the decision maker. So we need to keep close eye on them. We need to manage those stakeholders very carefully. Whereas if some of the people which has got a high interest, but they don't have any power. So those are the people we need to probably keep them informed because they are highly interested and we need to use them in our favor. Like how many mega projects you guys have seen where we find something very silly, whether it's some stone from 7,000 years and you can't remove it, or there may be some species in the water which you can't remove it, or there may be some community and organization which may have got just environmental impact or something like that. So every project, most of the project and the mega project will find something unique where people can protest or the group can protest, and which has got a major impact on the project schedule and the cost.
Yeah, that is truly amazing, Sanjiv. I love it. You're giving a bit of a taster there, but you're not giving everything. I love the 3 steps, and that's quite a good hook for those listening. It's interesting. There was a study done here in the UK, and I can't remember the exact details, but that labeled oral communication as one of the key characteristics or skills to have as a project manager or project professional, at least. You're obviously tackling this from a project controls perspective. Are there common stakeholders that you'd get in most project controls roles, or does it vary? I'm just wondering, is there a blueprint to say, you know, your key stakeholder is the project manager if you're the project controller? You know, it might be the sponsor. Is there a blueprint, or does it vary project to project dependent?
Look, it vary mainly project to project, but some of those stakeholders are very common. So some of the stakeholders are like whether you have got the project manager, you have got the contractor, you have got the subcontractor, you have got the project steering committee or project sponsor, you have got the report to the bank and the investor, trade union, government. So depending upon whether it's a public sector or private sector project, the stakeholder metrics vary. But for the public sector project, I think there are a lot of stakeholders outside the project which we need to manage. In the private sector, we have got a control within the project. So I think it's more manageable. So public sector projects where major funded project coming from the government, and it's a public money. So more stress I am just going to put on the public sector project and the government project where it is funded by the taxpayers' money. And if we are not managing those projects very well, we are not doing our job.
Absolutely. The public is a massive, massive stakeholder. I agree with you, especially on those projects. I think just in general, you know, most projects that we, are part of, eventually it's for the public at large anyway. Okay, so that's great. So most people go, well, that sounds obvious. You know, you got to put a stakeholder management plan together, and most projects probably do this, right? They probably at the beginning, they put together a stakeholder management plan and they box tick, it's done, then it gets stored in some file, probably online these days, and never to be seen again. Are you going to go into a little bit more beyond that to say, once you've done this, this is how you actively need to constantly be aware? Because I feel like it's one of those boxing exercise that, you know, the organizations we are educated through fantastically put us through, but it's just something that's, you know, sort of, yep, done, all good.
No, so it's not the tick the box sort of thing. I will be in the presentation looking at finally the understanding your stakeholder and what we need to do. So again, I'll be asking the question to the audience, telling them once you have identified, you tick the box, you know who are the stakeholder, which quadrant they fall into, and what you need to do. So what you need to do is basically those stakeholder management plan to be developed and the communication. How you communicate, how often you communicate. You need to make sure that you win the stakeholders' support, because for the successful project, you need to win the stakeholders' support. If some of the stakeholders are in the opposition of the project act or project outcome, then again we need to turn them around. How we win their heart, how we win their support. So there will be some tips I will be giving in the presentation, that what we do once we identify all the stakeholders, how we develop the communication plan, and how often we interact with each stakeholder for the successful project.
Amazing. I'm looking forward to those tips, Sanjiv. I love a few tips. Just one more from me before I hand back to Val. I was just wondering, on that notion, just sticking with that topic, what is it that stops people from actually, beyond completing this analysis, actually actively looking at their stakeholder management plan and actively making that known throughout the project as these are stakeholders, this is who we need to communicate with, etc. What makes it a boxing exercise today on a lot of projects? What is stopping people?
I think sometimes it's just more, as you said, like it's a ticking the box exercise. That's what's happening nowadays. And some people think that the stakeholder management is the project manager, project director, or project sponsor's job and not my job. But remember, it's a job for every project team member. If you are working at the engineer's level, you are working at the contractor's level, you are dealing with the people. You are dealing with the subcontractor. You are dealing with the engineer. You are dealing with the outside governance body. You are dealing with many people internally and externally on the project. So if you are on the project, you have got the role to play in the stakeholder management.
That's a really good point, Sanjiv. And even if people don't get to your presentation straight away, the points from this podcast will be relevant any project around the world. I think you raise a really good point around stakeholder management. Then you talk about communication being everyone's responsibility, and I think that's 100% correct. It's very similar to safety, where safety
Absolutely.
and well-being is everybody's responsibility. And so is communication. I think everyone's going to get a lot out of this presentation, Sanjiv. I've got a question. I just want to know, from your perspective, what are you hoping the audience will walk away with once they've seen your presentation?
I think the key point I want to make is when we talk about the project control, people talk about the planning, scheduling, and the cost control. Look, I think they are the three areas they are looking at. And some people look at the risk management and the change management. And if you are advanced project controller, then you are trying to even integrate the risk and the change management into the planning, scheduling, and the cost control. So that's the whole gambit of project control. From my presentation, what I want to do is I was just trying to stress the point that, as said earlier, those triple constraints, we need to manage, we need to control them. But the factors like the stakeholder management is very important. And those are the very variable factor. And for the dynamic project, we don't have much control over that. So the people will be taking away from my presentation and my talk is we need to look at the stakeholder communication plan. We need to look at the couple of artifacts which is coming from the stakeholder management plan and like a permit schedule. So how many projects fail with the permit schedule where we have got not permit in the place at the timely manner and schedule blow out and the cost blow out. So the key takeaway from this presentation would be focus on the stakeholder management plan, know their impact, know their influence, what the influence of their power and their interest on the project schedule, cost, change, and the risk, and then control them properly and not just ticking the box.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Sanjeev. And I think as well, I'd love to just, we could talk forever, I'm sure, Sanjeev. And one of the things I'm really interested about, if they can expect this from your presentation as well, is how you can utilize that stakeholder management plan to influence stakeholders. Because one of the things that I find, I think Dale mentioned this, it does become a bit of a box ticking exercise. And we know most project controls people listening to this already know their role as a key integrator, as a communicator. But I think for the wider audience and perhaps just project people in general, the value of being that integrator is everyone's responsibility as well. And taking that stakeholder management plan and bringing it back to life. Because if it's just a Word document, if it's just a register or a table, as you mentioned, it's good to get those frequencies in place. But how do you keep it alive, and how do you make sure that people use it to influence in the right direction?
Like it's the one example is the people who has got the low power but the high interest. Yeah, those are the people we need to keep them informed. So my advice would be try to use this as a positive factor. Get those people because they are more interested in the project. They are more interested in the project outcome. They don't have the power, but those are the people who are highly interested in the project. We need to get them involved, keep them very much informed, and use this as a resource for the project success. Give them some tasks, give them to do something. So they are getting involved with the project because they are highly interested. So which as a stakeholder and which quadrant they fall into, we need to provide some sort of hint and tips about the treatment and communication plan, how we use them in the project favor.
That is awesome. I love it. So we've got 3 steps, we've got tips. This wouldn't be a Project Controls podcast without me asking Sanjiv, is there a way we can measure a stakeholder management plan? So how do we know if we're effective in delivering it or not? Because we like to baseline plans. We like to measure our progress against it. Is there a way to measure?
It's not an easy measure. I think there is no like a physical percentage complete or the weighting or anything like that on the stakeholder management plan. But what I tell people is talk to the person, talk to the stakeholder, ask them how satisfied they are. So it's more sort of like the customer satisfaction survey. You should be doing that sort of survey for the stakeholder management every now and often, and ask them openly how they feel about the project. And most of the people are very much transparent and open about, they can tell you that how they feel about the project, how they feel about their contribution, and how they feel about the project success criteria, whether the project is succeeding or no. And they have got a very good understanding about what the success look like. So it's more like a touch and feel. It's not like a hardcore measurement for the stakeholder management plan and the success of the plan, but it's more about like the customer satisfaction sort of survey, which you do with the stakeholder. And if you feel that most of the stakeholders are unsatisfied, then your stakeholder management plan is not working.
Brilliant, brilliant. Because we all know that which gets measured gets managed.
Yes.
So fantastic.
Absolutely.
Sanjiv, it's been amazing. I want to thank you for your time on this podcast, and we look forward to your presentation at the expo.
Thank you very much.